Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be diving even deeper into the Elder Scrolls Iceberg, where the lore starts to blur the line between myth and madness. In this episode, we'll be talking about everything from magical doomsday devices to mech battles in the 5th era, and even the deepest mysteries of the cosmos. If you haven't seen the earlier videos in the series, don't worry, you can jump right in here. But if you want to experience the full descent from the start, you can find a link to the Iceberg playlist on the screen or in the description. So sit back, settle in, and get ready to descend into the realms of madness. 237. Lorkhan's purposeful failure. Every religious tradition in Tamriel agrees that Lorkhan was instrumental in creating the mortal world. Some cultures, such as those of men, view him as their creator and honoured ancestor. But others, such as the Aldmer, revile him as a trickster who has robbed them of their immortality, dooming them to suffer in the mortal world. Yet perhaps there is another explanation for the missing god's actions. According to the text, more on the Sigic endeavour, the creation of the mortal plane may have been a result of Lorkhan's failed attempt to achieve enlightenment. It reads, "Why would anyone want to purposefully fail? Why would Lorkhan and his unwitting agents sabotage their experiments with the tower? Why would he crumble that which he esteems? Perhaps he failed, so you might know how not to." 238. The World Egg. In Sermon 20 of the 36 Lessons of Vivec, the warrior poet makes reference to an egg-layered universe with 3 distant coverage. At first, this seems needlessly vague, but it might simply be a poetic description of the structure of the cosmos in the Elder Scrolls universe. The egg shape is the wheel of creation, with Aetherius as the shell, Oblivion as the white, and Mundus as the yolk. But curiously, Vivec is not the only one to make this analogy. The ancient Dwemer book, The Egg of Time, appears to detail experiments involving the heart of Lorkhan, implying that the Dwemer may have also shared the notion of an egg-shaped universe. 239. The Khajiit Tower. We've already discussed the metaphysical towers of Tamriel. Some of the towers are clearly under the stewardship of a particular race, such as Red Mountain and the Dunmer, and the Throat of the World and the Nords. But it seems the Khajiit have no tower to call their own. Or do they? Could it be possible that there is another, unknown tower related to the Khajiit of elsewhere? Well, the book Words of Clanmother Anisi claims the Khajiit are charged with protecting something called the Lunar Lattice, which shields Nirn against the Great Darkness. It's possible that the lattice could be the Khajiiti tower, or perhaps the Lunar Lattice refers to the towers as a whole, and that the Khajiit have some kind of sacred duty to protect them. 240. Dunmer Hist Slaves. When the Argonians first appeared in Arena, they had a slightly more human appearance, and had Greco-Roman names like Julius or Claudius. But in later games, they take on their more familiar reptilian appearance, and either have names in their native language of Gel, or translated versions of those names, such as Hides His Eyes, or Runs in Circles. Now this is probably just a case of the Argonian lore getting more fleshed out as the series developed, but as always, there's an in-universe justification. In a 2014 post, Michael Kirkbride claimed that Arena Argonians are a strain of Hist Dunmer mutants created by the Hist to infiltrate the Dashan plane and beyond, an experiment that was seemingly abandoned long ago in the past. 241. The Grabbers. We touched on this briefly when we discussed the adjacent place, but let's dig a little deeper. According to the 36 Lessons of Vivec, the Grabbers were a mysterious race of people from the adjacent place. It was said that they never built a city of their own, and so instead tried to conquer Vivec City. To do this, they took Han Note, who had been one of the children of Vivec and Molag Bal, and transformed it into a vast monster called City Face. Then, in a final showdown, Vivec slew City Face with a weapon called the Ethos Knife, putting an end to the invasion of the Grabbers. Like many things in the 36 Lessons, it's not clear whether this actually happened, or if it's simply a metaphorical parable. In this case, I prefer to believe the former, simply because City Face has some of the coolest concept art in the entire series. 242. A. Or, I assume that's how it's pronounced. This is one of those words you'll find cropping up again and again in Elder Scrolls lore. It's a component of the words Aedra and Daedra, and appears repeatedly in the 36 lessons of Vivec. For example, Almalexia teaches Vivec's mother to whisper a spell to the child inside her. Ayem, Isati, Ivake. Michael Kirkbride has since explained that this language is Elnafex, the ancient speech of the Earthbones, and that A can be the verb to be, or a conjunctive, often used as a substitute for and. Now, I imagine a language where the words is, are, and are all interchangeable might become a bit confusing, so let's just all be thankful none of us have to actually study it. 243. Yakudans from a different Kalpa. One of the most intriguing possibilities in Elder Scrolls lore is that the Yakudans, and perhaps their rivals, the Sinistral Elves, didn't originate in this world at all, but in another Kalpa entirely. Their chief god, Ruptga, the Tall Papa, is said to have mastered something called the Walkabout, a way to endure the endless cycle of death and rebirth caused by Satakal, the world-eating serpent. Some scholars suggest that this was a kind of cosmic sword singing, allowing the Yakudans to wait between world skins, passing from one Kalpa into the next. If true, then the Yakudans didn't just flee across the sea to Tamriel. They may be the last survivors of a totally extinct reality. 244. Shazar became Akatosh. Okay, now this one is pretty weird. Shazar is the Cyrodiilic name for Lorcan, the missing god who was instrumental in the creation of the mortal plane. If you look at depictions of Akatosh in Cyrodiil, he often appears with two heads, one human and one dragon. Michael Kirkbride has suggested that Akatosh and Shazar are mirrors of one another, with the human head representing Shazar and the dragon head representing Akatosh. Another theory suggests that Akatosh may have come about from Alessia combining aspects of the elven god Uriel and the Cyrodiilic Shazar, the god of man, though I don't find this idea particularly convincing. Still, these theories do raise some interesting possibilities. The conflict of Akatosh and Lorcan is central to the ideological split between man and mer, so it would be ironic if they turned out to be the same being. 245. The Monkey Truth. We all know that apes together strong. But did you also know apes together smart? The phrase the monkey truth refers to the teachings of the prophet Morrowind, who was a member of the Imgur race, an ape-like beast folk from the forests of Valenwood. After seeing a vision of Saint Alessia, Morrowind began to preach a new philosophy which would become the basis of the Alessian order, which would eventually transform the empire into a theocracy. This new faith believed that all gods were part of a single, overarching deity known as the One. His most notable followers were the Marakati Selective, a cult within the Alessian order which caused the dragon break known as the Middle Dawn. The teachings of the Prophet were also promoted by the Temple Zero Society, which we discussed back in entry 116. They would even produce a physical pamphlet entitled The Monkey Truth, which was passed around the Bethesda offices during the development of Morrowind. To be honest, the whole thing sounds pretty bananas to me. 246. Red Moment. This refers to an event which happened during the Battle of Red Mountain, the climactic showdown between the Kaima and the Dwemer. The first possible meaning is referring to the moment when Kagranak used his tools on the heart of Lorcan, causing his entire race to vanish in an instant. But the other meaning refers to the possible activation of the Numidium during the battle, an event which may have caused a fracture in time known as a dragon break. The Battle of Red Mountain is one of the most disputed events in Tamrielic history, and it seems as if every witness left a contradictory account. So a dragon break would be an interesting explanation for these discrepancies, making it possible for all versions of events to have happened simultaneously. 247. The Provisional House. The Provisional House is an interdimensional space described in Vivec's 36 Lessons, Sermon 19. It's a kind of spiritual construct, a realm Vivec built in order to achieve insights that could not be reached while bound to the mortal plane. Vivek then built the provisional house at the centre of the secret door. From here, he could watch the age to come. The sermon then describes its 4 cornerstones in cryptic verses: a finger, a tongue, a piece of string, and 9 bones from a black cat, arranged into a protective word. Like much of Vivek's writings, the provisional house resists simple explanation. One interpretation is that it's a symbolic space where Vivek can step outside of time to gain prophetic vision. It's also possibly a metaphor for building one's own internal temple of enlightenment. Whatever the case, the provisional house reflects Vivek's constant pursuit of transcendence, even beyond the limits of godhood. 248. Alandro Sul. Alandro Sul was the legendary shield companion of Indoril Nerevar and a key figure in the War of the First Council. According to the Nordic saga, the 5 Songs of King Wulfharth, he fought and defeated the Ash King Ismir Wulfharth at Red Mountain, but was struck blind in the process. After the Battle of Red Mountain, he refused to bow to the newly ascended tribunal, blaming them for the death of Nerevar. He lived out the rest of his days among the Ashlanders, and is remembered as one of their greatest heroes. During Morrowind's development, he was originally a more important character. His chain armour was shattered into the 1,000 ringlets of Alandro Sul, which would be worn by the Ashlanders as earrings, allowing Sul's spirit to whisper to them the dark truth about the tribunal. At some point, this concept was abandoned, but Sul would eventually appear again as a character in Michael Kirkbride's Coda. 249. Demonic Almsevi. Some scholars claim that when the tribunal committed the foul murder of Indoril Nerevar, they did more than simply steal godhood. Almalexia, Sothasil, and Vivek are said to have mantled the very essence of the 3 good Daedra: Boethia, Azura, and Mephala. This theory is supported by the in-game book Vivek and Mephala, which notes how Vivek has quietly inherited the darker cultural practices once attributed to Mephala, such as being the patron god of assassination. I strongly doubt the idea that the Almsevi actually mantled the Daedric princes. Rather, I think they just paint the Daedra as their anticipations in order to create a sense of continuity in Dunmer religion. After all, it's easier to adapt existing traditions rather than create new ones entirely from scratch. 250. Kime, or Kim, or Chim, or however you want to pronounce it. We've touched on this subject several times already, but it's arguably the big concept in Elder Scrolls lore, so we'll dive deeper here. Kime is a phrase from the Elnafex language, and is also known as the sacred syllable of royalty. Essentially, it describes when one reaches a state of true enlightenment. It involves looking into the heart of reality, and understanding that you are just part of the dream that is the Aorbis. If one is able to reconcile their own individuality with the nature of the dream, then they can be said to have achieved Kime, a state of freedom and enlightenment which allows them to transcend all natural laws. Basically, think of it as getting the ability to use console commands in real life. Those who reach this stage and fail end up zero-summing, blinking out of existence altogether. There are 2 figures we know for sure to have achieved Kime: Vivek, whose 36 lessons serve as a guide to reaching it, and Tiber Septim, who used it to reshape Cyrodiil from a jungle to a temperate climate, and also possibly used it to ascend to godhood. But Kime isn't the end goal, it's just the first step to transcendence. The state beyond Kime is known as Amaranth, a process which involves mantling the godhead itself, and becoming the dreamer from which all reality springs. We'll be talking more about the Amaranth later, but for now, let's move on, before I end up zero-summing. 251. Skarl Secrets. As seen in Skyrim's Dragonborn questline, the Skarl tribe of Solstheim have long guarded certain sacred mysteries from the Daedric prince Hermaeus Mora. These secrets were finally surrendered during the events of Dragonborn, when the Skarl gave them up in exchange for the final word of the Bend Will Shout. In truth, the secrets are underwhelming, little more than forms of natural magic, or as Neloth mockingly puts it, fascinating new ways to skin a hawker. But the real value lies not in their content, but in the simple fact that they were hidden at all. Because of his nature, Mora covets all secrets, no matter how inconsequential. 252. Sound of the Moons. Among the Khajiit, few hold a more mystical connection to the cosmos than the Manes, spiritual leaders said to be sensitive to the will of Lorkhan himself. In ESO, the ancient Senche-Rat Jadari describes how she once heard the moons sing to her, their voices as sweet as moon sugar, until that song became the pounding beat of war drums. The implication is that Massa and Sekunda's melodies can change with the tides of fate, and that the Khajiit may hear messages from the moons, similar to how Argonians can hear the Hist, though it's possible I'm reading too much into this. 253. The World's Teeth. In the 36 Lessons of Vivek, Sermon 17, the warrior poet shows Nerevar the edge of the map near distant Akavir. Nerevar says that the edge of the world is made up of swords, but Vivek corrects him. Those are the bottom row of the world's teeth. It's a poetic image, but there's also an inside joke here. In the Elder Scrolls Redguard, a bug caused the water at the very edge of the playable map to appear as a wall of jagged spikes, like fangs rising from the ocean. Sometimes, what seems like divine wisdom is simply a reference to one of Bethesda's graphical glitches. 254. Dagoth Ur's Endgame. In Morrowind, Vivek gives the Nerevarine a report entitled Dagoth Ur's Plans, which explains the ultimate ambitions of the Sixth House. Step 1. Use the heart of Lorkhan to construct a second Numidium, a Kula Khan. Step 2. Use a Kula Khan to drive the Empire and the Outlanders from Morrowind. Step 3. Build a new theocracy based on the worship of a Kula Khan, and spread it to every corner of Tamriel. And Step 4. Profit. But there is a theory that Dagoth Ur's master plans go beyond this, to something even more insidious. Imagine for a moment, you are looking upon the great wheel of reality, on the brink of reaching enlightenment. But instead of realizing you are only part of the dream, you come to the opposite conclusion, that all of reality is just an extension of yourself. This is not Kaim, but anti-Kaim. This would explain why Dagoth Ur uses Corpus to transform his followers into eldritch horrors. He is seeking to erase all barriers between others and himself. Once the divine disease infects everyone on Nirn, then there will only be Dagoth Ur, the whole world transformed into the solipsistic nightmare of a mad god, composed of a single recurring letter. I. 255. Pelinal Time-Travelling Robot. This is a popular theory based on the Song of Pelinal. The text describes Pelinal as a diamond soaked red with the blood of elves, whose facets could unsector and form into a man, which makes him sound like some kind of elf-slaying Optimus Prime. The text also explicitly states that the Star-Made Knight was arrayed in armour from the future time, which many have taken as confirmation that he's a time traveller. We need to keep in mind that the Song of Pelinal is a fragmentary text that contains a lot of symbolism, so this might not be literal. But still, this is one of those theories that's just so cool, I've chosen to believe it's canon. 256. Raymond Ebenarm equals Remen. Raymond Ebenarm is a god of war who featured in Daggerfall, worshipped by both Breton and Redguard cults. But he has barely ever been mentioned since, and ESO actually removed some references to him from in-game books. His absence has led to the theory that Raymond has not been forgotten at all, but rather replaced. Ebenarm and Remen Cyrodiil may in fact be one and the same. Raymond could simply be a corruption of Remen's name, and as one of Tamriel's greatest conquerors, it's possible that a cult could have grown up around Remen as a god of war. There's also a possibility that through his actions, Remen was able to mantle Raymond Ebenarm, and the two figures have essentially merged into one. There isn't much evidence for this theory, but it offers an intriguing way to explain why one of the series' gods has basically been abandoned. 257. The Enantiomorph. This is one of the 6 walking ways by which a mortal can achieve godhood. It's actually lifted from a term in chemistry, describing a pair of molecules that are mirror images of one another. In the Elder Scrolls, the Enantiomorph works in a similar way. It involves 2 souls merging as a result of a third being, who acts as a catalyst or witness. In metaphysical terms, they are reenacting the eternal struggle of Anu and Padme in an endlessly repeating cycle. In Knights of the Nine, the prophet implies that Talos was an enantiomorph, comprised of Hjalti Earlybeard and Zurin Arctus. And Talos said to the Arctus, "Let us join as one to fortify this throne, this land, these people, each one glorious under heaven." 258. Third Moon. Known variously as the Ghost Moon, the Dead Moon, or the Den of Lawcatch, the third moon is a strange and fleeting sight in the night sky. It appears when Massa and Secunda align, forming what looks like an eclipse. But in Khajiit myth, this vision is far more sinister. The third moon is said to be the rotting corpse of Lawcatch himself, forever haunting the night sky. To the Khajiit, it represents the death and betrayal of the missing god. While other cultures dismiss the third moon as nothing more than an astronomical illusion, to the Khajiit it remains an unsettling omen, a glimpse of their god's lingering remains drifting through the void. 259. The Walkabout. In Yakudan mythology, the walkabout is described as the process by which one can persist beyond a single lifetime. The gods Tall Papa and Tuwaka used it to guide the Red Guards, teaching them how to escape the mortal plane and reach the far shores of Aetherius, avoiding destruction at the hands of Satakal. Satakal is the serpent who eats everything, cycling the world over and over, similar to Alduin, the Nordic world eater. Through the walkabout, the Red Guards would endure even as Satakal devoured creation, waiting out the destruction in the far shores until it was safe to return to the world. As we discussed earlier, the walkabout may be the method that the ancient Yakudans used to survive between Kalpas, although this remains unconfirmed. 260. White Gold Tower Universal Doomsday Device. All the elves of Tamriel have built structures in imitation of Adamantia, the first tower. But the Aelids outdid them all with the White Gold Tower. This grand structure, surrounded by 8 lesser spires, was a deliberate recreation of the Aorbis' structure, a wheel with 8 spokes, designed as a microcosm of creation, and perhaps as a tool to tap into its power. In Nuhata's Fire and Darkness, the writer asks the chilling question: if the Aelids built a wheel within the wheel, what would happen if they plucked its strings? The answer seems obvious. It would disrupt the wheel itself, unraveling reality. In other words, the White Gold Tower may have been nothing less than a metaphysical weapon of mass destruction. Throughout history, various factions have tried to seize the White Gold Tower for nefarious purposes. Molag Bal, Mehrunes Dagon, the Thalmor. Perhaps these attempts have been motivated not only by the tower's symbolic importance, but by a desire to harness its destructive potential. 261. Jib was the Nerevarine. Stand up. There you go. You were dreaming. What's your name? When you first wake up in Morrowind, the very first person you meet is Jib, a fellow prisoner on the Imperial ship. From there, you never meet him again, but Jib would go on to become a hero and a saint in the Dunmer Temple, credited with driving all of the cliff racers from Morrowind. He also released a successful album, including hits like Elsewhere Palace and Balmora Blue. Sadly, he was killed off screen during the events of Oblivion, and you can find his severed head in the ruins of Kvatch. His ghost later appears in the Soul Cairn during Skyrim's Dawnguard expansion, and there's a quest where you can help him complete his book. Anyway, this is almost certainly a joke entry, and there is no evidence at all to back it up. But to be honest, Jib's feat of eradicating those pesky cliff racers might be more impressive than anything the Nerevarine ever did. 262. House Dwemer. In First Era Morrowind, the Dwemer were collectively referred to as House Dwemer. This unusual terminology was likely a political necessity. The Great Houses formed the structure of the First Council, so the Dwemer would have needed a house designation in order to sit alongside the ruling families of the Chimer. I suppose it's also possible that the so-called House Dwemer was only one faction of the Dwemer of Morrowind. After all, we know some of the dwarves, such as Clan Warken, did not approve of cooperating with the Chimer, and even left for new lands because of it. So maybe the term House Dwemer is being used to describe only the Dwemer who participated in the alliance with the Chimera, as a way to differentiate them from those who chose not to. 263. When Dead Gods Dream. Okay, I need to admit defeat with this one. When Dead Gods Dream seems to be the name of an out-of-game text discussing the nature of Dagoth-Ur. It looks like it was once hosted on the Imperial Library website, but the link is now dead, and I couldn't find it anywhere else. I did find some second-hand discussion threads, and it seemed it may have talked about how Dagoth-Ur survived being killed at the Battle of Red Mountain, and possibly also the Dream Sleeve, but I can't really weigh in without having read it myself. I hope this is just down to my own research incompetence and not a case of lost media. If anyone has a link to this text, please let me know in the comments, and I'll give you credit when I upload the full iceberg in its entirety. Anyway, let's move on for now. 264. Khajiit ended the Merethic era. This comes from the Sermon Zero affair, a developer roleplay which took place on the early Elder Scrolls forums. In it, the character Kierjo Chorvak claims that an old Psijic belief says that the Khajiit, originally created as servants of the Eldmer, rebelled against the natural order and conspired with Lorkhan to bring the Merethic era to an end. It's one of several strange claims from the same text, which also describes the Argonians as descendants of Boethia and the Sayesi. Most of these ideas were likely early drafts or concepts that were later abandoned, but they offer an intriguing insight into the development of early Elder Scrolls lore. 265. Parabolic Kalpa. The theory of the parabolic Kalpa was first proposed by Lady Nerevar, a well-known lore scholar and contributor to the Imperial Library. It's based on the idea that history in the Elder Scrolls moves in cycles, not just a linear progression, but rising and falling in arcs. The further you go, the stranger and more mythic things become, eventually curving back towards the chaos of the Dawn era. Earlier eras were full of direct divine intervention and great feats of technology. The Dwemer building automatons, demigods like Morrowind and Pelennor fighting alongside men, or the Reman Empire launching a literal space program. But by the Third Era, the gods felt more distant, as if the magic was going out of the world. The parabolic Kalpa suggests that over time, this cycle will swing back again, and the world will return to mythic strangeness, with the boundaries between history and legend dissolving once more. 266. Sithis, Secret Lesson of Vivek. In Morrowind, players can find a strange cryptic book titled Sithis. On the surface, it reads like an obscure meditation on the dark god of the void worshipped by the Dark Brotherhood. But some lore scholars have theorized it may have been written by Vivek himself, perhaps even as a secret message to the Nerevarine. Certain passages echo the tone and vocabulary of the 36 Lessons of Vivek, leading to speculation that it was a veiled philosophical teaching from the warrior poet himself, rather than a simple Dark Brotherhood text. 267. Bendu Ollo. Bendu Ollo was a Colovian king and the leader of the legendary All Flags Navy. This massive coalition fleet was formed to wage war against the Slode of Thrass, who had unleashed the Thracian plague on Tamriel, wiping out nearly half the population. Within the game's lore, he's remembered as a hero of all Tamriel, but out of game, Bendu Ollo is also something of an inside joke for Bethesda. His name has been repeatedly used as a placeholder in pre-release materials, gameplay trailers, and even creation kit presets. 268. Trinimac still lives. In the mainstream version of Tamrielic history, the elven warrior god Trinimac was devoured by Boethia and transformed into the Daedric prince Malakath, and his followers, the Orcs, were forever changed. But not everyone believes this narrative. Some Orcs, notably King Gortwog of Orsinium in the Third Era, insist that Trinimac still exists, and that Malakath is nothing but a lying demon trying to keep the Orcs under his dominion. Even some Altmer still quietly honour Trinimac as the warrior god of their ancestors. Though the Trinimac cult fell out of favour following the most recent fall of Orsinium, some worshippers of the fallen god still persist in the Fourth Era. 269. The Aedra are dead. Some believe that the Aedra are not living gods at all, but corpses, or at best, comatose beings, their vitality spent in the act of creation. The book Aedra and Daedra states outright that Aedra can be killed, and in Oblivion, Mankar Cameron believes their power is spent, sneering that the gods you worship are trifling shadows of first causes. The idea is that when Mundus was formed, the Aedra gave up their power to make the mortal plane, and in doing so, they sacrificed themselves. This could explain why the Daedra remain active and interventionist, while the Divines are so distant by comparison. 270. Devaith Fear was the Battle Mage. In Battlespire, the protagonist is simply called the Battle Mage, an apprentice of the Imperial Battle College who must fight their way through the void castle known as the Battlespire to save it from Mehrunes Dagon. The Daedric Crescent and the Mace Scourge both appear in that game, and later turn up in the possession of Devaith Fear in Morrowind. This has led some fans to suggest that Devaith Fear was the Battle Mage, and that his relics are trophies from that adventure. It's a fun theory, but the problem is that Devaith is over 4,000 years old. It makes no sense for him to be a mere apprentice during the Third Era, and I doubt the Telvanni's pride would ever allow him to serve the Empire. So while it's a neat way to connect two games, it's almost certainly not canon. 271. 3 Talons. In Arena, the name Talon appears in 3 different places. In the game manual, Talon is the default name of the Eternal Champion. In character creation, it's also listed as the name of the champion's father. And in a cut opening slide, we see Talon Warhaft, the general of the Imperial Guard, described as the player's guardian. Arena famously had some inconsistencies in its lore, and a lot of it was just made up on the fly, so this is probably just another example of that. 272. The Underking killed Pelagius I. The direct bloodline of Tiber Septim didn't last long. His grandson, Pelagius I, ruled for less than 3 years before being assassinated at the Temple of the One in the Imperial City. This is the traditional history, but there is another account involving Pelagius, the Arcturian heresy. The last line of the text describes Pelagius meeting Ismir Wulfharth, who the book also claims is the Underking. I was friends with your grandfather, the Underking says. He sent me to help you run the Empire. This is a somewhat ominous ending, and might imply that the Underking came to murder Pelagius as revenge against Talos. But like many aspects of the heresy, it should be treated with healthy skepticism. 273. Sayesi Gauld. The book Mysterious Akavir describes the Sayesi people as immortal, vampiric, snake-like creatures. And if you've ever seen Stargate, this description might sound familiar. In that show, the Gauld are parasitic, snake-like creatures that take over other species as hosts. Some fans have drawn parallels between them and the Sayesi of Akavir. The reason the Sayesi are described as both men and snakes could be because they're actually serpentine parasites inhabiting human hosts. It's a creepy idea, but it's an interesting way to explain a lot of the contradictions in their descriptions. 274. Lunar Currency. This idea is first referenced in the 36 Lessons of Vivek, and then expanded upon in the Love Letter from the Fifth Era, an out-of-game Michael Kirkbride text. The love letter reads, "Death results in reappropriation of spirit towards its aligned A, either to the god planet Aedra or the principalities of Oblivion. Vek's name for this transaction is lunar currency, which seems to imply that the gods use the souls of mortals as a form of barter, though whether this is literal or metaphorical remains unclear." 275. Historical star inconsistencies. One of the oddities of the early Elder Scrolls games is how the stars and constellations aren't always consistent. For example, in Arena, the number of days in a year doesn't line up with later lore, and constellations simply don't appear in the night sky at all before Morrowind. Later games established the familiar birth signs and star patterns, but the earlier discrepancies raised the question of whether these are just developmental oversights, or if they reflect deeper gaps in Tamriel's cosmology, where time and the heavens are variable instead of constant. 276. Nemoli Star Orphans. Nemoli, or the Blue Star, is one of the Magnagi, the star children who followed Magnus into the void when he fled the Mundus. She is sometimes called the Reclusive Princess and is associated with untime events. During the Dragon Break of the Middle Dawn, Nemoli was said to be visible in the daytime sky, marking her connection to those temporal ruptures. Archprelate Favidius Tharn of the Alessian Order studied her, and believed that through her intervention, it was possible to provoke a dragon break. Some sources even suggest she was retroactively created by Sothosil, who named her Memory, a cosmic daughter who survived him after his death. 277. Bosma Hircine worship. Many assume that the Bosma shun Hircine because of the Green Pact, which binds them to Ifra and forbids changing their forms. But Hircine does have followers in Valenwood. Some Bosma invoke him for good fortune in the hunt, while others embrace more violent cults, especially during times of strife. During the First Aldmeri Dominion, extremists even turned to Hircine as a symbol of resistance against the High Elves, leading to kidnappings and blood rites in his name. Far from being absent, Hircine's presence in Valenwood is a reminder of the Bosma's wilder instincts. 278. Septimus Cygnus Zero-Summed. Septimus Cygnus, the mad scholar from Skyrim, spent years unravelling the secrets of Hermaeus Mora. As he discovers the Ogma Infinium, he says, "The world beyond burns in my mind. It's marvellous." Then he simply disintegrates. Some fans have suggested that this is what zero-summing looks like. Septimus achieving knowledge so vast that he realised his own unreality, and was simply erased from the dream. It also echoes the text Et Arda, Et Adra, Eat the Dreamer, which describes the last thoughts of an evaporating moth priest as he zero-sums. Still, the explanation could be a lot simpler. Mora could have just zapped Septimus once he'd served his purpose. Either way, his cryptic last words keep the theory alive. 279. The Soft Doctrine of Magnus Invisible. This out-of-game text, written by Douglas Goodall, explores the mysterious nature of Magnus and the Magnagi. Like the 36 Lessons of Vivek, the text hides hidden messages through code. When inverted and run through a substitution cipher, it reveals the verses: "The dragon is bound with noble sighs, the serpent is bound with shifting tones, the sun is bound with metal flames, the earth is bound with secret knots." The meaning remains cryptic, but later passages hint that Magnus and his followers can be honoured not through ritual or sacrifice, but through love. It cautions, however, that love for love's sake is meaningless, and love for one's own sake is emptiness. The implication is that the true worship of Magnus lies in selfless love, a philosophy that sets the soft doctrine apart from most other creeds of Tamriel. 280. Abnegyorbic Creed. The Abnegyorbic Creed is an obscure Aldmeri doctrine mentioned in both the Numantia Intercept and the Pocket Guide to the Empire, 2nd edition. It refers to a school of thought among the early Aldmer that rejected the mortal world altogether, longing instead to return to the primordial state before creation. In other words, it was a doctrine of abnegation, renouncing the Aorbis as flawed, and yearning for the infinite. The Numantia Intercept explains the White Gold Tower was a metaphysical machine built to undo the damage of convention, to reverse mortality itself and restore godhood. The Abnegyorbic Creed is one more piece of evidence that the Aldmer never truly accepted the world as it was, and dreamed of escaping it altogether. 281. Dun Mereth. In the Pocket Guide to the Empire 1st edition, we're told that when the Nords first arrived in what is now Morrowind, they called the land Dun Mereth, which is odd, because the Dunmer didn't even exist yet. The Chimer wouldn't be transformed into the Dunmer until hundreds of years later, after the Battle of Red Mountain. I think this is one of those cases where the lore seems to show its seams a bit. The concept of the Chimer simply hadn't been invented when this text was written, so it seems the writers accidentally created a small lore inconsistency. 282. 15 golden tones. The book Nerevar at Red Mountain describes a confrontation between Endoral Nerevar and Dumak, king of the Dwemer. Dumak says, "Stand down, my sweet Nerevar, or I swear by the 15 golden tones, I shall kill you and all your people." The same wording appears on Calcelmo's stone, a Dwemer inscription to the Falmer, stating that, "Only by the 15 tones did your new lives begin." But what does it mean? Well, this could have been how the Dwemer viewed the Daedric princes, not as divine beings, but as tones in the great music of creation, with the 15 referring to the traditionally recognised 16 princes in total. There could also be some music theory which is going over my head here, but I'm pretty tone deaf, so I'm probably the wrong person to speculate about that. 283. Ideal Masters are God of Worms' remnant. This theory claims that the Ideal Masters, the rulers of the Soul Cairn, are somehow fragments of Mannimarco, the King of Worms. This idea stems from the belief that Mannimarco had been split into two entities during the Warp in the West. The mortal Lich that we see in Oblivion, and the immortal God of Worms tied to the Necromancer's moon. If he could be divided in such a way, then perhaps he had also shattered into shards that form the Ideal Masters. But these days, this theory doesn't really hold up. It's been confirmed that the Ideal Masters were powerful necromancers who chose to transcend their mortal forms. Still, it's a neat example of how fan speculation filled in the gaps before the official lore was codified. 284. Sermon 37. The lost 37th sermon of Vivec was added in the Elder Scrolls Online, expanding upon many of the themes discussed in the original 36 lessons. It's every bit as dense and esoteric as the others, openly referencing metaphysical concepts like the Red Moment, Dragon Breaks, and the Amaranth. On top of that, the text includes a hidden message that links out of game to Michael Kirkbride's Coda project. If you're interested in Morrowind lore, it's definitely worth a read. 285. Flying Whale's Joy Snow. This comes from the 7 Fights of the Aldu Dagger, a piece of out-of-game lore written by Michael Kirkbride. It describes flying whales native to Skyrim that drift lazily through the sky, exuding a strange snowy substance. This joy snow supposedly has a narcotic effect on those who inhale it, a dreamy haze that can be euphoric or psychotic. It's possible that the giant bone bridge leading to the Mead Hall in Sovngarde is a reference to these creatures, implying there was a time where they really did sail the skies high above Skyrim. 286. Mankar is Jagar Tharn. This theory suggests that Mankar Cameron, the man responsible for the Oblivion crisis, might actually be the same person as Jagar Tharn, the Imperial battle mage who betrayed Uriel Septim VII during the events of Arena. Both are tied to Mehrunes Dagon, both were enemies of the Septims, and both brought chaos to Tamriel. Lore-wise, Mankar's racial background is already mysterious. He was supposedly born a Bosmer and used Mehrunes' razor to turn himself into an Altmer. So the idea that he could have used the razor's power to disguise himself as Tharn adds some credibility to the theory, although it doesn't really explain how he would have survived being melted at the end of Arena. 287. Sharmat. In Morrowind, Dagoth Ur is sometimes referred to as the Sharmat, or the False Dreamer. At first glance, this just appears to be the Dunmer equivalent of Satan. But it's a bit more metaphysical than that, and links back to some of the ideas we talked about during the entry on Dagoth Ur's master plan. In Sermon 13 of the 36 lessons, Vivec writes, "The Sharmat sleeps at the centre. He cannot bear to see it removed, the world of reference. This is the folly of the false dreamer. This is the amnesia of dream, or its power, or its circumvention. This is cryptic, but it could be interpreted as saying that Dagoth survived his first death in a sort of dream state. But as a false dreamer, the Sharmat doesn't understand that he is a figment of the dream. Rather, he believes that he is the dreamer. 288. Pankrato Sword. The Yakudans were famous swordmasters, and they practiced a powerful magical art known as sword singing. Some forbidden techniques were said to be so powerful that they were the equivalent of weapons of mass destruction. Chief among them was the Pankrato Sword, a technique that involved cutting the atomos, the indivisible essence of creation itself. To me, this sounds a little bit like splitting the atom, implying that Yakudans had developed some kind of sword nuke. The use of the Pankrato Sword would eventually cause the land of Yakuda to be sundered and drowned beneath the sea, and over time, the arts of the sword singers were gradually forgotten. 289. Landfall. This is a reference to an event in Michael Kirkbride's graphic novel project, Coda. The landfall is a catastrophe which involves the Numidium returning to Nirn, travelling forwards through time to the 5th era. The brass god would land at Alinor, using a power known as the Ancestro Scythe to erase the entire Altma race from existence, before going on to destroy Nirn entirely. But as the Numidium was about to wipe out the Dunmer and Khajiit, Nerevar would return, piloting a Kula Khan, and the two constructs would engage in a titanic battle. Although Nerevar was unable to stop Numidium, he bought enough time for the Dunmer and Khajiit refugees to flee to the moon of Massa and establish a subterranean colony called Al-Sotha below. This is all just the backstory for Coda, and the actual plot gets even weirder from here. 290. Salan. Salan is the oldest known city in the Shivering Isles. Its ruins are said to be thousands of years old, far predating the architecture found elsewhere in the realm. Some believe it may have been the Isle's very first capital, back in the days of Jigalag's rule before Sheogorath took over. Today, its main claim to fame is housing the Flame of Agnon, which ties it closely to the worship and myth of Arden Sul. If the Isles are madness given form, Salan might just be a shattered remnant of the order that came before. And with that, another layer of the iceberg is complete. We're getting deep now, and the light of the day is far behind us. Each new discovery is even weirder than the one before, and they're only going to get stranger and more mind-bending from here. I don't know about you, but I might need a hefty dose of moon sugar to get me through the rest of it. And before you go, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. These videos take a lot of work to make, and your support really helps in the fight against the algorithm. And remember to stay tuned for the next episode in the series. But anyway, I've rambled on enough for today. So until next time, take care.